Hello! I would be very pleased if you would like the video. Subscribe so you don't miss new videos every day that will help you relax. I'm also curious where you are listening to me from and what time it is now. Write it in the comments. Enjoy watching! The first rays of dawn painted the horizon with a pale, trembling light, casting a soft glow over the decks of the Niña. The sea was calm, yet the men on board were anything but at ease. For weeks, they had sailed under the command of Christopher Columbus, driven by the promise of lands unseen and the riches whispered about in European ports. Today, like every day, was a test of endurance, skill, and courage. Below deck, the crew stirred. Wooden beams creaked as sailors stretched their stiff limbs, the salty air mingling with the smell of wet rope and seaweed. In the dim morning light, the cabin held shadows that seemed to move on their own, reflecting the uncertainty that had settled into the hearts of every man aboard. Juan, a young sailor barely 20 years of age, rubbed the sleep from his eyes. He had grown up in the port of Palos, learning the ways of the sea from his father, a veteran of the Mediterranean. Yet nothing in those calm waters could have prepared him for the vastness of the Atlantic. He climbed the narrow ladder to the deck, each rung slippery from the previous night's spray, and felt the wind tug at his loose shirt. The Niña's sails flapped softly, whispering tales of distant lands. Columbus, standing near the stern, inspected the horizon with a practiced eye. His reputation had preceded him, a navigator of unparalleled ambition, whose vision of a westward route to Asia had drawn both admiration and skepticism. The men respected him, though fear often accompanied that respect. Breakfast was a meager affair, as always. Hardtack, salted meat, and water drawn from barrels sufficed to fuel their labors, though many longed for fresh bread and fruit. The ship's cook, a burly man with a permanent scowl, doled out portions with efficiency rather than generosity. Conversations were few. The crew's focus remained on the tasks ahead. By mid-morning, the day's routine began in earnest. Sailors climbed the rigging, tightening ropes and adjusting sails to catch the wind. Every movement had to be precise. A single misstep could result in disaster. The ship responded to their efforts with gentle sway, cutting through the deep blue waters with the grace of a creature alive. Juan found himself assigned to the crow's nest that day, a duty both coveted and feared. From this perch, one could see for miles in every direction, yet the exposure to wind and height was daunting. With the help of seasoned sailors, he ascended, muscles straining as he climbed. The view was breathtaking. The endless expanse of ocean, the delicate line where sky met water, and the other ships of the fleet moving like obedient shadows. Hours passed with the monotony of observation, broken only by the occasional shout from the lower decks. Columbus often descended from the stern to confer with his officers, discussing charts, the speed of the ships, and navigational adjustments. The tools of navigation were rudimentary by modern standards: compasses, astrolabes, and cross staffs, yet they were sufficient for men trained in their use. Every calculation mattered. Every degree could mean the difference between discovery and disaster. Around midday, the sun climbed high, its glare reflecting off the water in blinding sheets. Heat and salt combined to sap the strength of men, and the monotony of endless waves weighed heavily on their spirits. Some sailors spoke of home, of mothers and wives, of villages far behind them, while others fell silent, lost in thought or prayer. Despite the hardships, there was an undeniable thrill in their journey. The possibility of new lands, unknown peoples, and untold wealth drove them onward. Columbus himself seemed tireless, moving with purpose from deck to deck, issuing orders, inspecting equipment, and encouraging, or admonishing, his men. His voice carried over the wind, a constant reminder of the mission that bound them together. By late afternoon, the wind shifted, requiring a complete rearrangement of the sails. Crews worked in coordinated chaos, shouting instructions and pulling ropes with synchronized effort. Sweat streamed down their faces, and muscles burned with exertion, yet they executed every command with practiced skill. The Niña responded eagerly, its timbers groaning under the strain, yet steadfastly advancing westward. As evening approached, the sky transformed into a tapestry of color. Orange, pink, and violet streaked across the horizon, mirrored in the darkening waters below. Sailors paused to admire the beauty, a fleeting respite from the relentless labor. The sea, which had been a source of fear and anxiety, revealed a softer, almost tender side. Nightfall brought both relief and danger. The crew lit lanterns, casting flickering shadows across the deck. Stars emerged, guiding their way as the moon rose, silver and steadfast. Columbus consulted the stars with quiet reverence, plotting their course with meticulous care. Juan, exhausted but exhilarated, descended from the crow's nest, his legs trembling yet his spirit lifted by the grandeur of the ocean at night. Sleep came fitfully. Below deck, the men rested where they could, hammocks swinging with the gentle motion of the ship. Dreams mingled with the sounds of creaking timbers and lapping waves, a lullaby of uncertainty and anticipation. Each man knew that tomorrow would bring more labor, more challenges, yet also the promise of discovery. The night deepened, and the wind carried the scent of salt and distant rain. The Niña creaked under the constant push of the waves, each timber alive with the effort of cutting through the Atlantic. Juan, still uneasy from his perch in the crow's nest, now found a quiet corner on the deck where he could catch his breath. Around him, other sailors whispered in hushed tones, sharing rumors of monsters lurking in the depths or distant lands filled with unimaginable wealth. Some spoke of mermaids, others recalled tales of tempests that could swallow a ship whole. The line between superstition and reality blurred easily in the darkness. Columbus moved among them like a shadow, inspecting the decks and talking quietly with officers. He paused near the mainmast, gesturing toward the sails as if reading the language of the wind. "The current favors us tonight," he said softly, yet his words carried the weight of command. Every man aboard understood that even a single miscalculation could be fatal. The ocean demanded respect, and it rewarded only those who remained vigilant. Below deck, the sailors prepared their hammocks, securing them to the beams to withstand the rocking of the ship. The smell of brine and unwashed bodies mingled with the pungent aroma of the ship's stores, barrels of salted meat, hardtack, and dried legumes. The men ate in silence, chewing slowly as they contemplated the day ahead. For many, this meal was the last chance to gain strength before the labor of the night watch began. Juan listened as the voices of the crew mixed with the sounds of the sea. A soft rain began to fall, pattering against the wooden deck in tiny, rhythmic beats. Lanterns swayed with each movement of the ship, casting dancing shadows across weathered faces. Some men prayed quietly, crossing themselves or muttering invocations to saints they hoped would protect them. Others remained silent, their thoughts lost in memories of families left behind, of sun-warmed fields and familiar harbors. The night watch was a time of heightened tension. Sailors took turns scanning the horizon for signs of land, other ships, or dangerous reefs. The lookout's voice occasionally rang out, reporting on distant clouds or sudden changes in the wind. Juan, now assigned to assist with navigation calculations, learned the meticulous art of plotting their course using the stars. Every observation mattered: the tilt of the sails, the speed of the current, and the faint glimmer of light on the horizon. As the hours crept forward, the sea seemed to change its character. Waves rose taller, and the wind shifted unpredictably. The Niña heaved, and men braced themselves against the rolling deck. Columbus, calm and collected, gave precise orders, demonstrating a mastery of both the elements and the men under his command. His confidence was contagious, yet it could not entirely mask the fear that lingered in every heart. By the small hours before dawn, a distant thunderhead appeared on the horizon. The sailors tensed, preparing for the possibility of a storm. Ropes were checked, sails tightened, and the anchor inspected for quick deployment if needed. Despite exhaustion, the crew moved with the practiced efficiency born of months at sea. Each action was deliberate, a choreographed dance that kept the ship, and their lives, safe. Juan found himself reflecting on the strange mixture of fear and wonder that characterized life at sea. The ocean, vast and unknowable, held both peril and promise. Every sunrise and sunset was a reminder of their isolation, of the fragility of life upon these wooden vessels. Yet, alongside that fear, there was exhilaration, the knowledge that they were venturing where few had dared to go, following the vision of a man who saw continents where others saw only endless water. As dawn approached, the first light revealed a horizon tinged with pink and gold once more. The storm had veered away, leaving only the whisper of rain on the deck. Sailors stretched, rubbed their eyes, and exchanged quiet remarks about the night's events. Columbus, surveying the scene from the stern, seemed already to be calculating the day ahead. The Niña, steadfast and resilient, continued its journey westward, carrying men who were both ordinary and extraordinary in their endurance, courage, and resolve. As the first golden rays of the new day touched the horizon, the Niña's deck began to stir once more. The night had been long and filled with the tension of uncertain waters, yet the men moved with habitual efficiency, honed by weeks at sea. Each sailor had a role, and the seamless execution of their duties was essential to the survival of the ship. The smell of wet ropes mingled with the faint scent of dried provisions, a constant reminder of the life they now led. Juan, though weary from the night watch, rose with the sun. He stretched, feeling the pull of muscles he had scarcely used in land-bound work. Every movement reminded him of the ship's relentless motion, the gentle sway, the occasional jolt as the hull met a wave, and the rhythmic creak of timbers that seemed alive under the ocean's weight. He glanced around at his fellow sailors, men hardened by the sea yet still human in their fatigue. Some yawned and rubbed their eyes, others silently performed their morning rituals, offering prayers or crossing themselves as if invoking divine protection for the day ahead. Columbus was already on the deck, consulting with his officers and tracing the course on worn charts. His presence was commanding, yet his manner had a quiet intensity that reflected both confidence and the weight of responsibility. He spoke in measured tones, directing adjustments to the sails and noting the subtle shifts in the wind. Every gesture was precise, every word deliberate. The men watched him not only as a leader but as a symbol of the mission that had brought them so far from the familiar shores of Spain. Breakfast followed, a meager yet essential meal. Hardtack, a slab of salted meat, and a small ration of water were the sustenance that fueled them. Juan chewed slowly, mindful of the need to conserve strength. Conversation was minimal, consisting mostly of observations about the weather, the condition of the sails, and the occasional report of a distant sighting. Even in these small moments of respite, the air was thick with anticipation. Each man knew that the ocean could change in an instant, transforming from placid and beautiful to violent and unforgiving. The work of the morning commenced promptly. Sailors climbed the rigging, checking knots, tightening ropes, and adjusting the sails to capture the shifting currents of wind. Juan assisted with these tasks under the guidance of an experienced seaman named Rodrigo. The older sailor's hands were calloused and sure, moving over the ropes with a familiarity born of decades at sea. Rodrigo spoke little, preferring to demonstrate rather than explain, but his instructions were clear. Watch the wind, Juan. Let it guide you. Every shift matters. From his vantage point, Juan observed the horizon with a mixture of awe and apprehension. The Atlantic stretched endlessly, a vast expanse of deep blue that both frightened and inspired. Clouds scudded across the sky in rapid succession, a silent reminder of nature's capriciousness. Far below, the deck teemed with activity. The rhythmic calls of sailors, the creaking of wood, and the occasional shout as a line snapped taut. The Niña was alive, responding to every movement, every adjustment, every careful maneuver. By mid-morning, the heat had intensified, and the sun beat down upon the deck with relentless fervor. Sweat ran down faces, soaking clothing, and the smell of salt and brine mixed with the musk of exertion. Juan paused briefly to wipe his brow, taking in the scene around him. Each sailor bore the marks of labor: tanned skin, sun-bleached hair, hands roughened by rope and wood. They were a collective of experience and endurance, bound together by necessity and the shared vision of discovery. Columbus remained a constant presence, moving from station to station. His gaze was sharp, scanning the horizon for signs of land or weather changes. He consulted the compass, measured angles with his astrolabe, and adjusted charts with careful precision. The men trusted his judgment implicitly, even when it contradicted their own instincts or fears. His leadership was both a source of inspiration and an anchor in the unpredictable seas. Around noon, the sun reached its zenith, casting harsh shadows across the deck. Juan and his companions paused briefly for a second, lighter meal, rationing water carefully. Conversation drifted to tales of past voyages, of storms survived and ports reached. Some spoke of home, recalling mothers, wives, and villages left behind. Others remained silent, lost in thought or prayer. The monotony of the endless sea was broken only by the occasional thrill of spotting a distant bird or a floating piece of debris that hinted at land. The afternoon brought its own challenges. A sudden squall approached from the northwest, darkening the sky and churning the waves. Sailors sprang into action, securing loose items, adjusting sails, and preparing the ship to ride the tempest. Columbus directed with calm authority, issuing commands that cut through the noise of wind and water. The Niña heaved and rolled, yet the crew moved with the efficiency of men trained by necessity. The storm passed after an hour, leaving behind a refreshed but wary crew. As the day waned, the horizon displayed a palette of colors: orange, rose, and violet blending seamlessly with the deepening blue of the sea. Sailors took a moment to appreciate the spectacle, a fleeting reminder of the beauty that lay beyond the hardships of their journey. The Niña continued westward, each wave bringing them closer to unknown lands and the fulfillment of their mission. Evening descended, and the deck took on a different rhythm. Lanterns were lit, casting flickering light upon weathered faces and the polished wood of the ship. Men rotated through night watches, scanning for signs of land, reefs, or enemy vessels. Juan found himself assigned to monitor the southern quadrant, eyes straining to discern shapes against the darkened horizon. The ocean was quieter now, its surface shimmering under the moonlight, yet the sense of anticipation never left him. Below deck, sailors prepared for rest. Hammocks were secured, and those not on duty sought the limited comfort of benches or the floor. Conversations were hushed, prayers whispered, and memories of home shared quietly. The smell of the sea mingled with that of provisions, and the gentle sway of the ship lulled some to sleep while others remained alert, listening for the slightest change in the wind or the creak of a rope. Juan reflected on the day as he settled into his hammock. The ocean had tested him, taught him, and inspired him in equal measure. He thought of the men who had come before, navigating these same waters with courage and skill, and of the men who would come after, continuing the legacy of exploration. Each moment at sea was a lesson in resilience, patience, and the unyielding pursuit of a vision larger than oneself. As the night deepened, Columbus made his rounds once more, consulting with officers, checking instruments, and observing the stars. The constellations were a map, a guide, and a comfort. The Niña sailed steadily, a testament to human ingenuity, courage, and the collective effort of those aboard. For Juan and his fellow sailors, the day had been a trial and a triumph, a microcosm of the journey they had undertaken, a single day in a life defined by the call of the unknown. And so, as dawn approached once more, the cycle began anew. The Atlantic stretched before them, vast and enigmatic, holding secrets, dangers, and promises. Every sunrise, every wave, every gust of wind was a reminder of their place in the world. A small, determined crew carving a path through uncharted waters, guided by the vision of a man who dreamed of reaching lands unseen. The morning sun rose steadily over the horizon, spilling pale light across the rolling waves. The Niña's sails flapped softly in the gentle breeze, and the crew began their routine with a familiarity born of repetition and necessity. Yet, the calm was deceptive. Clouds gathered in the distance, dark and heavy, hinting at the capricious nature of the Atlantic. Sailors glanced upward, a flicker of unease crossing their weathered faces. Juan climbed the rigging again, his fingers gripping the damp ropes. From his elevated vantage point, he could see the distant swell of the sea in the shadow of clouds stretching across the horizon. The wind was shifting, subtle at first, then gathering force. Columbus, standing near the stern, noted the change and called for a meeting of his officers. Charts were spread out, compasses consulted, and careful calculations made. Every degree, every adjustment, mattered. The ocean was a living entity, demanding constant vigilance. Below deck, sailors prepared for the unexpected. Ropes were checked, barrels secured, and loose objects stowed. The ship groaned as the wind picked up, the timbers responding with a familiar rhythm. The Niña was no stranger to such trials, yet each storm brought its own challenges. The crew worked with precision, a choreography of labor learned from months at sea. Shouts rang out as lines were pulled taut, sails adjusted, and the mainmast braced against the strengthening gusts. Juan felt a surge of adrenaline. The thrill of facing the storm, combined with the knowledge that a single misstep could be fatal, heightened his senses. His mind raced with images of overturned ships and the stories sailors told of men lost to the merciless Atlantic. Yet there was also a profound sense of purpose. Each command followed, each task completed, was a step closer to survival and, ultimately, discovery. By mid-morning, the storm had arrived in full force. Waves rose and crashed against the hull, sending sprays of salty water over the deck. The wind howled, tearing at sails and whipping ropes into frantic motion. Sailors clung to whatever they could, bracing themselves against the heaving ship. Columbus remained composed, issuing commands with a calm authority that belied the chaos around him. His confidence was contagious. The men trusted him to guide them through the tempest. The Niña rocked violently, each swell threatening to throw men off balance. Juan held fast, muscles straining as he maneuvered along the deck, assisting with sail adjustments and securing lines. The thunder of waves against the hull was deafening, yet amidst the roar, there was a rhythm, a pulse that matched the heartbeat of the crew. Every order was executed with urgency and precision, a testament to human resilience in the face of nature's fury. Hours passed in a blur of exertion and focus. The storm raged, yet the ship endured. Sailors shouted instructions over the wind, their voices raw from constant command. Columbus moved among them, inspecting work, offering guidance, and occasionally checking the instruments. The astrolabe and compass became tools of survival as much as navigation, guiding their course while the storm tested their mettle. In the brief lulls between waves, Juan caught glimpses of the vast ocean, a churning expanse of blue and white, simultaneously beautiful and terrifying. His thoughts wandered to home, to the quiet streets of Palos and the familiar faces of family. The contrast between land and sea was stark, and yet he felt a deep connection to the journey he was part of, a small figure amidst the vast, untamed Atlantic, striving towards something greater than himself. As afternoon approached, the storm began to relent. Clouds still loomed, but the wind lessened, and the sea's fury gradually subsided into rolling swells. Sailors collapsed where they could, soaked and exhausted, yet the relief was tempered by the knowledge that vigilance must continue. Columbus gathered his officers, reviewing the ship's position and adjusting the course for optimal travel. The experience of the storm had sharpened their awareness, reminding all aboard of the ocean's unpredictable nature. The Niña's decks, though battered, bore the marks of human endurance and teamwork. Every line secured, every sail adjusted, every command followed, spoke of the crew's resilience. Juan found a moment to rest, leaning against the mainmast, feeling the gentle sway of the ship now that the worst had passed. Around him, men spoke softly, recounting the storm, joking nervously, or simply catching their breath. There was a camaraderie born of shared hardship, a bond that no ordinary circumstance could forge. Evening descended with a quiet majesty. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of gold and crimson. Lanterns were lit across the deck, casting long shadows and illuminating the tired but determined faces of the crew. Columbus stood at the stern, surveying the scene with a practiced eye. Despite the fatigue, there was a sense of accomplishment. The storm had tested them, and they had endured. Night brought a calm, yet the sense of anticipation remained. Sailors rotated through watches, scanning the horizon, checking sails, and preparing for whatever challenges might arise. Juan found himself assigned to the southern watch again, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. The stars emerged, guiding them, offering a semblance of order in the vastness of the ocean. Each constellation was a familiar point, a tool for navigation, and a reminder of the natural order beyond human control. Below deck, men settled into hammocks or benches, seeking rest in the ship's sway. Conversations were hushed, prayers whispered, and memories of loved ones revisited. The smell of salt, wood, and provisions filled the air, blending into the fabric of life aboard the Niña. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by the occasional call of a lookout or the creak of the ship. Juan reflected on the lessons of the day, the unpredictability of the ocean, the importance of teamwork, and the leadership of Columbus. Every storm, every challenge, every success reinforced the fragile balance between human effort and nature's vast power. The Niña had endured, and so had they, bound together by shared purpose and unwavering resolve. As the night wore on, a sense of quiet determination settled over the ship. The storm was behind them, but the journey continued. Every sunrise would bring new tasks, new challenges, and new opportunities. For Juan and the crew, life at sea was a continuous cycle of labor, vigilance, and wonder. And through it all, the Atlantic remained a vast, mysterious world, holding secrets and promises yet to be discovered. The morning after the storm was eerily calm. The Atlantic, which had raged with fury only hours before, now lay stretched out in glassy tranquility, the water reflecting the pale pink hues of dawn. The Niña drifted forward gently, her sails still damp and heavy, her timbers groaning softly in the lingering swell. For the crew, the silence felt almost sacred, a reprieve from chaos, a fragile peace that few dared to disturb. Juan emerged onto the deck, blinking against the soft light. His muscles ached from the labor of the previous day, yet the freshness of the air filled him with renewed energy. Around him, the sailors moved quietly, inspecting rigging, checking ropes, and mending torn sails. The ship bore the scars of the storm, splintered wood, loose nails, and frayed cords, but she had survived, and so had her crew. Columbus stood at the stern, his gaze fixed on the horizon. His face, weathered yet resolute, betrayed neither fatigue nor doubt. He held a small parchment, his fingers tracing lines drawn from countless nights of calculation. The sea was vast and merciless, but in his mind, it was a map of possibilities. To others, the horizon was an empty line. To him, it was a promise yet to be fulfilled. The morning routine unfolded with quiet precision. Breakfast consisted of hardtack softened in water, dried peas, and a small ration of salted pork. Conversation was muted. Exhaustion still clung to the men like a shadow. Some muttered prayers of gratitude for surviving the storm, while others stared out across the water, their minds adrift with thoughts of home. Rodrigo, the old seaman who had mentored Juan, leaned against the rail, his eyes scanning the horizon. "The ocean is kind after she's cruel," he murmured, half to himself. "But she never forgets." Juan nodded silently, unsure whether to take it as a warning or a reflection. By mid-morning, the ships of the fleet, the Niña, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, were once again in formation. Signals were exchanged via flags and shouts across the water, maintaining coordination as they continued their westward course. Each vessel carried its own microcosm of fear, hope, and endurance. The storm had united them in hardship, but the lingering question remained: how much longer could they sail before men's faith began to waver? The day stretched on, uneventful at first. The rhythmic creak of the hull, the soft slap of waves against wood, and the cry of seabirds created a hypnotic symphony. Yet by early afternoon, a cry broke the monotony. "Birds!" shouted a lookout from the Pinta. Every head turned. High above, 3 white birds circled lazily before vanishing into the distance. Excitement rippled through the crew. Birds meant land, or at least the nearness of it. Columbus immediately took note, his expression sharpening. He called for his officers, discussing the sighting in rapid Spanish. The men listened with growing anticipation, their weariness forgotten. For weeks, the horizon had yielded nothing but endless blue. Now, for the first time, there was a sign of hope. Throughout the afternoon, the ocean seemed to shift in color and texture. The deep sapphire of the open sea softened into shades of green and turquoise. Pieces of driftwood floated past, some bearing signs of vegetation. One sailor even retrieved a small branch with fresh leaves still attached. The men crowded around it as though it were a relic from heaven. Columbus studied it carefully, his lips curving into a rare smile. "Land is near," he declared. His voice carried across the deck, firm and filled with conviction. "The signs are true. Prepare yourselves." That night, the atmosphere aboard the Niña changed. Laughter returned, cautious but genuine. Songs drifted up from below deck, mingling with the gentle slap of waves. For the first time in many days, hope overshadowed fear. Men spoke of what awaited them, of gold and spices, of strange lands and civilizations unknown. Juan listened in silence, his imagination painting vivid pictures of jungles, mountains, and cities glittering beneath the sun. Columbus, however, remained vigilant. Though his heart swelled with belief, he knew the ocean's deceptive nature. He ordered double watches, commanding the lookouts to keep their eyes fixed on the horizon through the night. Lanterns glowed faintly at the bow, their light swaying with the motion of the ship. As midnight approached, the crew's excitement turned restless. Every shadow, every ripple, seemed a possible coastline. Some men swore they could smell the faint scent of earth or hear the distant crash of waves on unseen shores. Columbus himself stayed on deck, pacing slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. The stars glittered above, guiding him as they always had, silent witnesses to his ambition. By dawn, no land had appeared. The mood aboard shifted again, from excitement to disappointment. Some muttered curses under their breath. Others avoided speaking altogether. Juan felt the tension growing like a storm waiting to break. The hope of discovery, once so close, seemed to fade into the horizon once more. Days passed in this uneasy rhythm, hope rising with each new sign, only to be dashed by the endless sea. Yet, Columbus never wavered. He adjusted their course slightly southwest, guided by instinct and calculation. His confidence, unwavering even in the face of skepticism, became both the glue that held the expedition together and the spark that fueled quiet resentment among the weary crew. Juan began to notice the murmurs, hushed conversations between sailors when Columbus was out of earshot. Some questioned whether they had been led astray. Others spoke of turning back before supplies dwindled. The air grew heavy with unspoken doubt. Rodrigo, ever the realist, warned Juan to keep his head down. "The sea's not the only thing that can swallow a man," he said grimly. Columbus sensed the shift in morale. He gathered the men on deck one evening, addressing them under a sky painted with dying light. His voice, though calm, carried the weight of command and belief. "My friends," he began, "we have endured storms, hunger, and the vastness of the unknown. The ocean has tested our courage, but I tell you now, the signs are clear. We are close. Each mile we sail brings us nearer to a world no European has ever seen. I have faith in our purpose, and in you. Hold fast a little longer, and we shall be rewarded beyond measure." The words hung in the air like a benediction. Some men nodded, their faith rekindled. Others looked away, unwilling to commit their hearts to another disappointment. But for that night, at least, the ship was united once more in shared hope. The following morning, a strange stillness settled over the sea. The water was unnaturally calm, reflecting the sky so perfectly it seemed as though the ship floated in air. The wind died to a whisper, and the sails hung limp. The crew worked in silence, every creak of the hull amplified by the quiet. The heat was oppressive, the air thick and heavy. By afternoon, tempers began to flare. With no wind, progress halted. The men grew restless, their earlier excitement dissolving into frustration. Columbus remained outwardly composed, though the lines around his eyes deepened. He ordered the sails adjusted to catch even the faintest breeze, and his officers fanned out to maintain order. Juan found himself again in the crow's nest, scanning the horizon for any sign of change. Hours passed, and the monotony gnawed at him. His mind wandered, back to Spain, to his family, to the reasons he had joined the voyage in the first place. Adventure had lured him, but now he longed for something as simple as firm ground beneath his feet. Then, just before dusk, something caught his eye. A flicker of color, distant, faint, but undeniably there. He squinted, heart pounding. It was low on the horizon, a shape darker than the sea, irregular and steady. Not a cloud, not a wave. Land. Land. Land to the west, he shouted, his voice breaking with excitement. The cry spread like wildfire. Men rushed to the deck, peering into the fading light. Columbus appeared instantly, spyglass in hand. He scanned the horizon, his breath catching as the shape solidified against the glow of sunset. "Land," he whispered, as though the word itself were sacred. Then louder, for all to hear, "Land. We have found it!" The deck erupted in cheers, shouts, and tears. Men embraced one another, their exhaustion forgotten. Songs rose into the evening air, prayers of thanksgiving mingled with laughter. After weeks of uncertainty, after storms and despair, they had finally reached what they sought. Columbus stood apart for a moment, eyes fixed on the dark outline ahead. His dream had become reality, his conviction vindicated. The world, vast and mysterious, had opened its doors. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the land remained a shadow, unreachable until morning, yet close enough to see. Lanterns flickered across the deck as the Niña sailed onward, cautious but jubilant. Juan leaned against the railing, staring into the dark, his heart swelling with a mix of awe and disbelief. He had been there when the unknown became known. That night, few slept. The men took turns watching the faint outline of land, afraid it might vanish like a mirage. The ocean was calm, the stars bright, and for the first time in months, the air smelled faintly of soil and vegetation. It was a scent that spoke of hope, of rest, of discovery. The Niña glided silently through the water, a small vessel carrying dreams far larger than herself. Tomorrow, they would set foot on new soil. But tonight, under a canopy of stars, they celebrated, not just land, but the triumph of faith over fear, of endurance over doubt, of the human spirit's unyielding quest to reach beyond the horizon. The first light of dawn spilled across the ocean like molten gold. It painted the waves in shimmering hues and revealed the faint silhouette that had haunted the crew's dreams through the night. What had seemed a shadow was now unmistakably real: land, its contours rising gently from the sea, covered in green and crowned with mist. A collective murmur spread across the deck of the Niña. Sailors who had not slept in days now stood wide-eyed, their fatigue replaced by awe. The smell of earth, faint but unmistakable, mingled with the salty air. It was the scent of homecoming in a place no one had ever known. Juan leaned over the railing, his heart thudding in his chest. The sight before him was surreal: palm trees swaying in the morning breeze, birds darting across the sky, the shimmer of rivers winding through lush forests. It was a world untouched by European eyes, ancient and new all at once. Columbus stood near the prow, dressed in his finest garments: a dark velvet tunic, gold-trimmed cuffs, and the insignia of Castile upon his chest. He held a small banner bearing the royal emblems, his expression solemn yet radiant. Behind him, his officers waited in silence, their faces reflecting a mixture of triumph and reverence. "Prepare the boats," Columbus commanded. His voice was calm, almost hushed, as though afraid to disturb the sanctity of the moment. "We go ashore with the rising tide." The sailors moved quickly, lowering the longboats into the water. The sea was gentle, its rhythm steady, as if it, too, acknowledged the significance of what was about to happen. Columbus stepped into the lead boat, accompanied by his trusted men, including the captains of the Pinta and the Santa Maria. Juan was chosen among the rowers, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the oar. As they approached the shore, the details of the land sharpened. White sand beaches stretched like ribbons along the coastline, and beyond them rose dense groves of unfamiliar trees heavy with fruit. The cries of tropical birds filled the air, a symphony unlike any heard in Europe. The boat slid gently onto the sand. Columbus stepped out first, his boots sinking into the soft earth. He paused, looked skyward, and fell to his knees. With one hand clutching the royal banner, he pressed the other to the ground. "Gracias a Dios," he whispered. "We have reached the Indies." The others followed his example, some kneeling, others crossing themselves in silent prayer. Juan felt a lump in his throat. This moment, the first touch of their feet on this mysterious soil, felt like stepping into the pages of Scripture. It was both an ending and a beginning. Columbus rose, turned toward his men, and spoke in a voice that carried the weight of history. "By the grace of God and the authority of their Catholic majesties, I claim this land for Castile and for Spain." He drove the banner into the sand. The fabric caught the wind, unfurling in a burst of crimson and gold. The sound of its fluttering mingled with the rustle of palm leaves and the distant cry of birds. They had arrived. For a long while, the men simply stood, taking in the landscape. Some wandered to the edge of the forest, touching the leaves, smelling the flowers, tasting the fruit. Others knelt by the shore, scooping up handfuls of sand as proof of their triumph. Juan wandered a short distance inland, mesmerized by the colors and sounds. Butterflies the size of his hand fluttered through the air, streams glimmered in the sunlight, and the earth smelled rich and alive. He felt as though he were walking through a dream painted by God himself. Then, from the edge of the trees, movement. A group of figures emerged silently from the forest, the island's inhabitants. Men and women with bronze skin, dark hair, and curious eyes, dressed in woven garments and adorned with feathers and shells. They watched the newcomers with a mixture of wonder and caution. Columbus stepped forward slowly, raising his hands in peace. He carried small gifts, glass beads, mirrors, and brass bells, symbols of friendship. The islanders approached hesitantly. When they were close enough, One of them reached out and touched Columbus's cloak, then smiled. The tension dissolved into mutual curiosity. The islanders spoke in a musical tongue, their words soft and fluid. Columbus tried to communicate through gestures, pointing to the sky, the sea, himself. Slowly, laughter replaced fear. Juan offered one of the children a small copper coin, and the boy's eyes widened in amazement. Around them, the sailors and islanders exchanged trinkets and foods, a moment of fragile harmony, unaware of what history would one day make of it. By midday, the Europeans explored further inland. They discovered clear streams, groves of fruit trees, and villages built of wood and palm. The air was filled with the scent of flowers and smoke from distant fires. Everywhere, the land seemed to overflow with life and abundance. Columbus took careful notes in his journal, describing everything he saw: the birds, the plants, the people. "They are gentle and generous," he wrote. "They give freely of what they have and know nothing of greed or guile. With good instruction, they would make fine Christians." That evening, as the sun set over the ocean, the sailors built a small cross from driftwood and planted it near the shore. They sang hymns of thanksgiving, their voices rising into the dusk. The islanders watched quietly from a distance, curious but unafraid. Juan sat by the fire, staring at the flames. Around him, laughter and song filled the night, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He gazed at the stars, those same stars that had guided them across the ocean, and wondered what they looked like from home. For the first time in months, the ground beneath him did not sway. Yet he felt unsteady, as though the world itself had shifted. Days turned into weeks. The explorers built a small settlement on the island, which Columbus named San Salvador. From there, they ventured to nearby lands, guided by the islanders' canoes and knowledge of the sea. Everywhere they went, they found new wonders: mountains of green, rivers of silver, and skies that burned with colors no European painter could imagine. But beneath the beauty lay tension. The sailors, long deprived of comfort, began to crave more than adventure. They wanted gold, spices, proof of riches worthy of kings. Every shiny stone or glimmer of metal was seized upon with desperation. The islanders, though kind, grew wary of their guests' insistent questions and strange hunger for possession. Juan watched the change unfold with unease. The camaraderie that had carried them through storms now gave way to greed. Fights broke out among the men. Some hoarded trinkets given by the locals. Others spoke openly of taking what they desired. Columbus remained focused, his eyes always on the horizon. He was convinced that the great cities of Asia lay just beyond the next island. His journals filled with notes and dreams, each more ambitious than the last. Yet, in quiet moments, even he seemed troubled. One night, as the campfire burned low, Juan found him alone, staring out to sea. "You've seen the world, Captain," Juan said softly. "Do you think this is truly the Indies?" Columbus didn't answer at first. The waves whispered at their feet. "It must be," he said finally, "for I have followed the signs, the stars, the compass. God would not guide us astray." Juan nodded, though he wasn't convinced. The land before them felt too new, too wild, too untouched to be the fabled East. But he held his tongue. As the days passed, the ships prepared to return to Spain. The Santa Maria had run aground and been lost, but the Niña and the Pinta were seaworthy. The men gathered supplies, loaded cages of exotic birds, baskets of fruits, and several islanders who agreed, or were persuaded, to accompany them as ambassadors. On the final night before departure, the crew gathered one last time on the beach. Fires flickered against the dark sea, and the islanders brought gifts: food, feathers, carved idols. The air was filled with music and laughter, but also a strange melancholy. Juan felt it too. He looked at the faces of the people who had welcomed them without fear, and something inside him ached. He wondered what would become of them once more ships arrived. Ships filled not with explorers but conquerors. When dawn came, they set sail once more, the coastline slowly fading into the mist. Columbus stood at the stern, his gaze fixed backward. Behind him, the new world shimmered in the early light, vast and silent. Ahead, the old world awaited, hungry for stories of wonder and wealth. The journey home was calmer, though the sea tested them again with storms and hunger. Through it all, Columbus wrote tirelessly, crafting the narrative of his triumph. He spoke of paradise found, of lands ripe for faith and empire. Juan, meanwhile, wrote his own notes, simple reflections of what he had seen and felt. He wrote not of gold or glory, but of the people, the forests, the way the wind had smelled of flowers. Months later, when they finally reached Spain, the city erupted in celebration. Bells rang, banners flew, and crowds filled the streets to greet the returning heroes. Columbus knelt before the monarchs, offering gifts and words of triumph. He was hailed as Admiral of the Ocean Sea, the man who had expanded the world. Yet, amid the cheers, Juan felt a quiet disquiet. He had seen something few men ever would. A world untouched, pure in its simplicity, and he feared what would follow once others came. He walked to the harbor one evening, watching the waves lap against the shore. The same sea that had once been a barrier was now a bridge, and he knew it would carry many more ships, each bringing change. History will remember the admiral, Rodrigo had once told him, but the sea remembers all of us. Juan smiled faintly at the memory. Then he turned away from the water, his mind filled with images of palm trees and starlit skies, of laughter in a language he would never understand but would never forget. For one day in the life of a sailor had become a chapter in the story of the world, a story of discovery, wonder, and the endless human desire to chase the horizon. The months that followed the expedition's return to Spain unfolded like a dream blurred by the roar of celebration. Columbus's name filled every tavern and cathedral, every street corner and royal court. The Admiral of the Ocean Sea, they called him, the man who had crossed the unknown and found a new world. Seville burst into festivity as the fleet's battered ships drifted up the Guadalquivir River, their sails torn but triumphant. Crowds pressed along the banks, cheering and throwing flowers into the water. Church bells rang for hours, and priests lifted prayers of thanksgiving for God's grace upon Castile. Juan stood among the crew, dazed by the noise and color. The air felt strange after months of ocean wind, dense with perfume, incense, and the chatter of thousands. Yet beneath the triumph, he felt an undercurrent of something heavier, as if the land itself could not yet understand what had been unleashed. When they reached the royal court at Barcelona, the grandeur of their reception surpassed imagination. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, seated on thrones of gilded wood, awaited the admiral. Columbus knelt before them, dressed in velvet and gold, a far cry from the salt-streaked captain who had faced storms and mutiny. He presented his gifts: bright feathers, woven cloth, exotic birds, and the few islanders who had come with them, dazed by the journey and the noise. The court gasped at the sight of them, whispering of paradise, of the edge of Eden. Juan watched from behind the crowd, his heart conflicted. He saw awe on the faces of the nobles, but also greed. The promise of gold glimmered in their eyes like a fever. When Columbus spoke, his voice filled the hall. "Your Majesties, we have reached the Indies as foretold by faith and reason. The lands are rich beyond measure, the people gentle and open to our ways. With more ships, we could bring them the light of God and the glory of Spain." Applause thundered through the chamber. The monarch smiled, granting him titles and promises of another voyage. Columbus bowed, his dream already expanding beyond what any of them could see. That night, as music and feasting filled the palace, Juan slipped outside into the cool air. He walked to the edge of the courtyard, where he could see the stars, his old companions on the open sea. They seemed unchanged, distant and silent, untouched by the noise of kings. He thought of San Salvador, the beaches, the laughter of the islanders, the scent of flowers in the air. Those memories glowed brighter than all the torches of the court. For him, the discovery had not been of gold or glory, but of wonder, the realization that the world was far wider and more beautiful than any man had imagined. In the following months, Spain stirred with feverish energy. New ships were built, new crews recruited. Every port hummed with the promise of wealth and empire. Columbus, now admiral, prepared to return with a fleet not of 3 but 17 ships, an army of colonists, soldiers, and priests. Juan was among those invited to join the expedition again. Yet when the offer came, he hesitated. The sea called to him still, but so did the memory of the islanders' open faces, the innocence in their eyes. Something deep within him whispered that what was coming would not be a journey of discovery, but of conquest. He declined the offer. Instead, He took work at the docks of Cadiz, helping to repair ships bound for distant waters. He lived simply, keeping to himself, sometimes sharing stories with younger sailors who hung on his every word. They called him Juan del Mar, John of the Sea. But his nights were restless. The ocean haunted his dreams. He would wake with the sound of waves in his ears and the scent of palm trees in his memory. Sometimes he wondered if he had truly set foot in paradise, or if the ocean had merely shown him a mirage. When the news of Columbus's second voyage reached Spain, the city celebrated again. But rumors followed. The islands were not as peaceful as they seemed. The settlers quarreled. The admiral's authority was challenged. Whispers of rebellion and cruelty drifted across the sea, carried by returning sailors. Years passed. The world changed faster than anyone could have imagined. More expeditions followed. Cortés to Mexico, Pizarro to Peru. Fleets upon fleets sailing westward, hungry for gold. The oceans that had once marked the edges of the world became highways of empire. Juan watched it all unfold like a tide he could not stop. One evening, in the quiet of his small room overlooking the harbor, Juan sat at a wooden table with a single candle burning low. He took a quill and began to write, not to a person, but to the sea itself. To the ocean that carried me beyond the edge of the world, you have no beginning and no end. In your depths lie the bones of sailors and the dreams of kings. I was a small part of your story, one wave among countless others. But you showed me something no man can forget. I saw a world untouched by greed, a land that sang with its own harmony. I fear we will drown it, as we have drowned so many things. Yet I also know that discovery cannot be undone. The world has opened, and we must face what we have found. If someday you take me again, let it be not as a conqueror, but as a pilgrim of the wind. He sealed the letter and placed it inside a small wooden box. The next morning, he took a rowboat into the bay and dropped it into the water. The box floated briefly before the tide carried it away, out past the harbor, past the horizon, into the endless blue. Years later, word reached Spain that the great admiral had fallen from grace. Columbus, once hailed as a hero, had been stripped of his titles and imprisoned in chains. The crown had turned cold, weary of his demands and accusations. Juan read the news with quiet sorrow. He remembered the fire in Columbus's eyes, the unshakable faith that had carried them through storms and mutiny. The man had dreamed greater than any of them. But dreams, he realized, could devour those who held them too tightly. When Columbus was released, old and broken, he returned to Spain and lived out his final years in obscurity. Some said he still believed he had reached Asia. Others claimed he died doubting his own discoveries. Juan never sought him out. Some memories, he thought, were best left to the sea. By the turn of the century, the shape of the world had changed forever. Maps once blank now bloomed with islands, continents, and oceans named and claimed by empires. Ships sailed in endless procession across the Atlantic, carrying missionaries, merchants, soldiers, and slaves. The discovery that had begun with faith and wonder had become the foundation of a new age, an age of exploration and conquest, glory and tragedy. Juan, now an old man, often walked along the shore near Cadiz. The sea still spoke to him, whispering with the same eternal voice. Sometimes he would sit for hours, watching the horizon where sky and water met. Children would gather near him, asking for stories of the great voyage. He would smile and tell them of the storm, the first sighting of birds, the night they saw land for the first time. He spoke of palm trees and music, of the way the stars looked over the open ocean. But he never spoke of gold. Was it worth it? One child once asked. Juan looked out to sea, the light of sunset glinting off his eyes. That depends on what you mean by it, he said softly. The world became larger, yes, but men's hearts, perhaps smaller. When his time came, Juan felt it in his bones. The world had changed too much, and he no longer belonged to it. One autumn morning, he walked to the harbor where the Niña had once set sail. The ships were larger now, their sails towering like cathedrals. He rented a small fishing boat, said a quiet prayer, and rowed beyond the harbor walls. The water was calm, the wind gentle, the sea stretched before him, endless and familiar. Some say the fisherman saw him last drifting toward the horizon, his silhouette framed by the setting sun. The boat was found days later, empty. There were no signs of struggle, only a folded piece of parchment tied to the mast. It read simply, "The sea takes back what it lends. Tell them I've gone home." Centuries later, scholars and kings would argue about who truly discovered the New World, about dates and routes, maps and motives. But for those who lived it, for Juan, for Rodrigo, for every nameless sailor who faced the endless blue, it had never been about names. It had been about survival, faith, and the raw, terrifying beauty of the unknown. The day they sighted land was more than the birth of a new world. It was the moment humanity realized the planet had no edges, only horizons. The discovery was not of geography, but of possibility. And though history would remember Columbus as the visionary, it was the sailors who bore the brunt of the sea, whose hands built the bridge between worlds. On quiet nights, when the ocean is calm and the stars burn bright, the waves still carry their whispers, the songs of those who crossed into the unknown and, in doing so, changed everything. One day in the life of a sailor became a story that reshaped the earth. The dawn that followed was unlike any they had known before. The air was still, heavy with moisture, and the horizon glowed with a strange haze that blurred sea and sky into one endless veil of gold. For a few long moments, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, as the rising sun cut through the mist, a cry rang out from the Pinta, the cry every sailor dreamed of hearing. "Tierra! Tierra!" The words spread across the decks like fire. Men stumbled to their feet, straining their eyes toward the east. Juan dropped the rope he had been coiling and climbed the ladder 2 steps at a time. And there it was, faint, green, and shimmering in the distance, a line of land. Not clouds, not illusion, but solid earth. After weeks of emptiness, the sight struck them like a revelation. Tears welled in hardened eyes. Some men laughed uncontrollably, others fell to their knees, crossing themselves over and over. Columbus stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He whispered something under his breath, a prayer, perhaps, or a vow. Around him, the sailors erupted in a cacophony of joy, disbelief, and reverence. The Niña's deck became a place of chaos and worship at once. Yet amid the jubilation, there was also awe. The new land shimmered like a promise, its contours slowly forming as the ships drew nearer. Palms rose against the sky, and the air carried the scent of wet earth and blooming vegetation, so unlike the sterile salt of the open sea. Birds, bright and unfamiliar, circled overhead, their cries echoing across the water. As they approached the shallows, Columbus ordered the sails trimmed and the anchors prepared. Every man leaned over the rails, staring at the coastline that unfolded before them. For some, it was the Garden of Eden itself. For others, it was the edge of the world. "Remember this day," Columbus said softly to his officers. "It will live in every tongue that dares to dream beyond the horizon." When the small landing boats were lowered, Juan found himself chosen to join the first shore party. His heart pounded as he stepped into the rocking vessel, the oarsmen dipping their blades into the clear turquoise water. The sand grew closer, pale and luminous beneath the sun. The sound of the surf filled his ears, a sound he hadn't heard in over a month. The moment his feet touched the land, Juan knelt and pressed his hands into the sand. It was warm, almost alive. Around him, other sailors did the same, laughing, shouting, weeping. Columbus descended last, his movements deliberate, regal. He held a banner bearing the royal colors of Castile and Leon, and behind him, the men carried a wooden cross. The ceremony that followed was solemn, sacred. They planted the cross into the soil, then raised the banner high, claiming the land in the name of God and Spain. Columbus's voice rang clear over the surf. "By the grace of God Almighty, and in the name of their Catholic Majesties, we take possession of this land, which shall be called San Salvador." The men repeated the words, their voices trembling with exhaustion and faith. The wind carried their echoes inland, where the trees swayed as if in acknowledgement. Soon, figures appeared at the edge of the forest, people of the island, their skin bronzed by the sun, their bodies adorned with feathers and beads. They watched silently, curious but unafraid. The sailors froze, unsure whether to fear or to marvel. Juan's heart raced again, not from the sea this time, but from the unknown standing before him. The first contact was tentative. Columbus raised his hand in peace, and one of the islanders stepped forward. They exchanged gifts, colored glass beads for fruit and woven cloth. Smiles bridged the distance that language could not. Juan watched, feeling as though he stood at the meeting of two worlds. The day unfolded like a dream. They explored the beaches, collected water from clear springs, and marveled at the abundance of life. Bright birds, strange flowers, and fruits bursting with sweetness. The men feasted for the first time in weeks, laughing until the sun sank below the horizon. For that one evening, all hardships seemed forgotten. But as darkness fell, and the sounds of the island grew louder, drums in the distance, cries of unknown creatures, the old unease returned. Juan lay awake beneath the foreign stars, thinking of how far they had come and how little they truly understood. The ocean behind them was vast and silent, the land before them, mysterious and uncharted. He realized, with a mix of pride and dread, that they had crossed not just a sea but a boundary between worlds. Columbus, seated apart, wrote by lantern light in his logbook. His quill scratched steadily across the page. Descriptions of the land, the people, the abundance of gold hinted at in gestures and smiles. He recorded it all, his mind already envisioning new voyages, new claims, new empires. Juan watched him and wondered whether the admiral saw the same beauty that he did. The soft glow of moonlight on the water, the laughter of islanders echoing across the sand, the delicate peace of a world unspoiled. Or was Columbus already dreaming of conquest, of the fame that would carry his name across the centuries? The waves whispered an answer Juan could not understand. He closed his eyes, hearing both the sea and the drums of the island merge into one haunting rhythm. It was the sound of discovery and of destiny.